Welcome back now for the news in detail. Now, after days of unrest, Iraq's Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi has asked for parliamentary support to reshuffle his cabinet. In a televised address, Mahdi called for dialogue with protesters after a third day of anti-government demonstrators in Baghdad. He said there is no magical solution to Iraq's problems with chronic bad government and endemic corruption. Mahdi pledged to pass a law granting poor families a basic income and other social support. The Prime Minister's announcement comes after 4,000 protesters rallied in Baghdad defying a government-enforced curfew. 44 people have been killed and over 1,000 injured in this week's mass protests. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin says he is willing to work with the United States even as President Trump's focus shifts to his political views. Speaking at a conference, the Russian president said it is impossible to stop working with a global power like the US. He said the Washington's domestic situation must be taken into account. Putin also urged Ukraine's President Zelensky to complete the peace process in eastern Ukraine. Russia says it is helping China build a missile attack warning system. Speaking at a conference in Sochi, President Vladimir Putin said the network will drastically improve China's defense capabilities. Only Russia and the US currently possess missile attack warning systems.
We are helping our Chinese partners build a MAWS, a missile attack warning system. This is a serious thing that will drastically increase the defense capabilities of the People's Republic of China, because at the moment, only the US and Russia have such systems.
Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev has met with Cuba's President Miguel Diaz-Canel for talks to strengthen ties between the countries. The meeting has been arranged against a background of escalating pressure on Havana from the United States. Moscow has sought to re-engage with Cuba in recent years as part of a broader strategy to expand its presence in Latin America. Experts believe Russia wants to prove itself as a counterweight to the influence of China in the United States. Medvedev's visit, the highest-profile Russian tour since President Vladimir Putin visited in 2014, is symbolically important. Russia has the capacity to help Cuba out of its current fuel crisis, which Havana blames on the United States sanctions against the island. In a further escalation of their trade war, the United States has imposed another $4.4 billion in tariffs on Chinese exports. The Commerce Department says the punitive duties will target wooden cabinets and vanities. The decision came as U.S. President Donald Trump announced trade talks with China will resume in Washington next week. Now, talking to reporters at the White House, Trump said he has a lot of avenues for action.
I have a lot of options on China, but if they don't do what we want, we have tremendous power.
Meanwhile, after weeks of unrest, Hong Kong bans people from wearing masks at public assemblies. The government invoked a tough colonial-era emergency law to enforce the ban. Addressing a press conference, Hong Kong's chief executive, Carrie Lam, said political violence is destroying the city and authorities could not allow the situation to further deteriorate. Lam expressed concern at the participation of students in protests, saying it jeopardized their safety. But she denied that Hong Kong is in a state of emergency. Lam said the government has banned mask wearing to stabilize the situation in Hong Kong.
The objective of this regulation is to end violence and restore order. And I believe this is now the broad consensus of Hong Kong people.
Moving on, United States President Donald Trump says the planned talks with North Korea will go ahead despite Pyongyang's test of a ballistic missile. Speaking to reporters at the White House, Trump said North Korea wants to hold negotiations to defuse tensions. The United Nations Security Council is expected to hold closed-door talks today on the latest test. This meeting is at the request of Britain, France and Germany. North Korea is banned from ballistic missile launches by Security Council resolutions. Meanwhile, a team of North Korean negotiators has arrived in Sweden ahead of talks with the United States. Now, the US and North Korea will resume nuclear dialogue on the 5th of October. In other news, Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe says he will meet North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un to discuss the abduction of Japanese national by Korean agents. At a parliamentary session, Abe offered talks with Pyongyang despite the recent missile launches. Earlier, he condemned the latest missile test, calling it a violation of United Nations sanctions. Now, in a sharp reversal of India's earlier claims, Air Force Chief Rakesh Kumar Singh has admitted that Indian forces shot down an Indian Air Force helicopter in occupied Kashmir on 27th of February. Addressing a press conference in New Delhi, Air Chief Singh described the friendly fire incident as a big mistake. Contradicting India's previous stance that the chopper crashed in an accident, Singh said the Mi-17 chopper was shot down with a missile. The Air Chief said disciplinary action is being taken against 2 officers found responsible for the deadly blunder by the judicial inquiry. 6 Indian Air Force personnel were killed in the incident. Now, news from Ecuador, whose President Lenin Moreno says protests in the country's capital, Quito, and the city of Guayaquil are under control and will end. On Tuesday, the president declared a nationwide state of emergency when the controversial removal of oil subsidies was announced. Moreno defended the ending of the 40-year-old subsidy on oil as necessary to improve the economy. Indigenous groups, students and unions have protested by barricading roads with rocks and burning tires. Moreno says protests will not be allowed to paralyze Ecuador.
A team of ministers in Quito have informed me that the areas of violence are being controlled almost totally, as is the case here in Guayaquil, where violence has also broken out. The state of emergency, ECU 911, has helped me manage operations. I have come here to Guayaquil.
Well, the world media has called for an end to lockdown and communications blackout in occupied Kashmir. Indian government had revoked special status of the valley on August 5th and imposed curbs. Occupied Kashmir has been cut off from the rest of the world for the last 61 days. The international media has voiced concerns over Indian governments depriving the people of their basic rights. Qatar-based network Al Jazeera TV said Indian government has arrested over 100 minors. Australian journalist CJ Wellman said occupied Kashmir is facing shortage of food and medicines. A UK-based magazine, The Economist, says some 2,000 Kashmiris have been detained without any charge. Press TV of Iran has also highlighted Indian government's restrictions on journalists in the valley. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has published a report saying over 14,000 Afghan children have faced grave violations in the last 4 years. He said the figure includes 3,500 young people killed and over 9,000 injured in the continuing conflict. Guterres says the report shows an increase of 82% in child casualties within the last 4 years. He expressed serious concern for the children killed and injured as a result of aerial operations conducted by forces from all sides. Guterres said armed groups were responsible for 43% of child casualties, while government and pro-government forces were responsible for 30%. He also verified the recruitment and use of 274 children by armed groups and government forces. Coming up next in the bulletin after a short break. Hundreds of fans attend the launching event of book. Ursus returns to Cantabrian mountains. Welcome back now. Moving on with the news stories. The death toll in Al-Qaeda-linked militant attacks on Mali's military camps has risen to 38. Mali's defense ministry says almost 60 of their soldiers are still missing. The ministry says it has launched a joint operation in the region with forces from Burkina Faso. Officials have blamed the attack on militant groups which have set up operations in parts of Mali. Meanwhile, families of Malian soldiers demonstrated in Bamako, demanding information about their missing men. Meanwhile, the death toll of people killed by e-cigarettes have risen to 18 in the U.S. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said more than 1,000 cases related to vaping have been recorded this week. Doctors are unable to establish what is causing the illness. The symptoms include chest pain, fatigue, and shortness of breath. Doctors from CDC say the cases are expected to increase. Vaping-related injuries have been confirmed in 48 states, with deaths in 15 of those. In the United States, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and daughter Chelsea Clinton host the book signing ceremony of their co-authored book. The launching event for the book Gutsy Women was attended by hundreds in New York. This report has more details.
The crowd at the bookstore waited in queue to meet the Clinton women. Clintons have been making rounds this week promoting their book that tells stories of 100 courageous women around the world. Among the figures profiled in the book are civil rights activist Dorothy Height, Eddie Winster, fellow First Ladies Betty Ford and Eleanor Roosevelt. Clintons have also talked about writer Rachel Carson and activists Harriet Tubman, Malala Yousafzai and Greta Thunberg.
You know, it's a great book. I love the concept of just gutsy women in general. I think we need to learn more about women like that these days, especially with our current political climate. So it's good to still be around people that are like-minded with us.
In interviews, Clintons shared their support for impeachment to proceed against U.S. President Donald Trump, especially regarding Ukraine. A few pro-Trump protesters stationed themselves outside of the bookstore.
Ask Hillary Clinton about GPS fusion, about the Steele dossier that funded.
In her book, Hillary Clinton says the gutsiest thing she's ever done was to make the decision to stay in her marriage to Bill Clinton. The book is available in various bookstores and on digital platforms.
In a scientific breakthrough, a man paralyzed from shoulders down has been able to walk using a pioneering four-limbed robotic system. In trials, the 28-year-old tetraplegic commanded and controlled an exoskeleton using brain signals. He used sensors implanted in his head to send messages to control the movements of his paralyzed limbs. A two-year trial brings doctors a step closer to helping paralyzed patients operate computers with thought alone. But for now, researchers say the exoskeleton is purely an experimental prototype and is far from ready for clinical use. At a time when most animal species are going extinct, Spain's brown bears are reclaiming the Cantabrian mountains. But this has only been possible because of the work of people and conservation organizations. More on brown bears in this report.
Cantabrian brown bears have been growing in number in Spain's mountainous northwestern province after almost vanishing. Their habitat was destroyed by the construction of roads and infrastructure, illegal hunting and poisonous bait left out for them. After a dedicated campaign by conservationists, the population has steadily grown and the area now counts between 330 and 350 brown bears.
At the most eastern part of the Cantabrian Mountains, there were years when we didn't find any reproductive females, and some years it was only a female with her babies. So, they were in critical danger of extinction. Now, We are talking about 330 to 350 bears in a constant population, and they have an interesting reproduction rate. In the last years, we have detected more than 40 females with babies in the Cantabrian Mountains.
The Brown Bear organization had to allay myths about the animals, fence off hives and orchards, and run an information campaign in schools to stop poaching. New methods have been developed to allow bears and humans to live in harmony.
A bear is not going to learn that they can't touch the hives unless they receive an electric shock, and then it learns. But humans should be the ones adapting to these systems, and the administration should support cattle breeders and the population with these solutions.
Any harm or damage caused by the bears to livestock, beehives or fruit trees is fully compensated by funding from the European Union. Taken together, all of these ideas have helped the bear population thrive once more.
In business stories, India's central bank has cut its key lending rate for the 5th time this year, in another attempt to support the stuttering economy. Announcing the decision, the Reserve Bank of India slashed its growth forecast for the ongoing fiscal year from 6.9% to 6.1%. The RBI cut the rate at which it lends money to commercial banks by 25 basis points to just over 5%. India's so-called repo rate is now at its lowest level in almost a decade. India's economy grew by just 5% between April and June, the slowest pace since 2013. In today's announcement, the RBI said India's economy remains vulnerable to weak domestic demand and sagging export prospects. European markets have edged up in early trading, propped up by expectations that the US Federal Reserve could take further easing measures. Investors are awaiting the release later today of US payroll data for September. Market confidence has been undermined this week by surveys pointing to a slowdown in the US services and manufacturing sectors. They have deepened fears that the US-China trade war is starting to hurt growth in the world's biggest economy. As a result of international oil prices are set to record a large weekly loss, although futures have edged up today. London's FTSE 100 index is trading about 1/3% higher. The CAC 40 in Paris has gained a fraction, while Frankfurt's DAX index is flat. Now let's have a look at the weather updates. Well, with the weather update, we come to the end of this bulletin. For more news and updates, keep watching Indus News.